There we go. Hello, the U.S. Embassy Doha and Education USA welcome you to today's webinar, Applying to Ivy League Universities. Thank you for joining us. My name is Paula Masad, and I'm the English Language and Education Advisor at the Embassy. And with me, I have my colleagues, Asil and Melissa, who will introduce themselves. Asil?
Hi, I'm Asil Ghali. I'm the Education Advisor. Thanks for joining us today.
Great. I'm Melissa Deschamps. I'm the Regional Coordinator for the Middle East and North Africa for Education USA. We're excited to have you here. Please remember to ask your questions. Let us know what we can answer for you, and especially with our speakers here.
Thank you. I would also like to welcome our presenters for today's webinar, Justin Mazur, Associate Dean of Admissions at the University of Pennsylvania, Keith Light, Director of International Admissions, Yale University, and Whitney Greene, Director of International Recruitment, Columbia University. Welcome, and thank you for joining us today. I would like to remind all participants to type their questions in the chat box, and we'll address them at the end of the presentation. Thank you. And Whitney, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, wonderful, fantastic. Well, thank you so much, certainly first and foremost to Education USA for putting this wonderful presentation together and enabling us the opportunity to speak and engage with students who might have an interest in our three schools, as well as schools that are like ours. Our goal over the next hour or so is to give you kind of a brief snapshot about our individual institutions and speak a bit towards admissions and financial aid, as that is very commonly a question that we get from students, and hope to give you some tips, suggestions, insights as to how we go about our admissions process as you think about the kinds of universities and colleges that might be the best fit for you in the coming years. I'm joined by two wonderful colleagues, as I mentioned, or was mentioned, Keith Light from Yale and Justin Mazur from Penn, and so we'll kind of kick this off together. But first and foremost, you might be interested as to why we have conversations together. I think one of the big questions we often get from students and families is that we are rivals, that we are not necessarily always collegiate in terms of how we engage, and that couldn't be further from the truth. Ultimately, all of our schools are interested and eager to find wonderful, talented individuals from around the world that are going to contribute to our campuses. But even more, we certainly are in the mindset of how do we generally be a resource to students when you're thinking about applying to schools. And so while we will use our three institutions as examples, we certainly hope to give you insights that give you a sense of what other schools that are very selective in the US are like and what they do in terms of their admissions process and financial aid. And lastly, hopefully leave you with some questions so that you can begin those conversations with those different offices and get the kind of information that you need to apply in an effective way. So you might be wondering for yourself why we do travel together, why we do have these kind of sessions together. For one, we usually do get to travel in person, and so we are very sad not to be able to visit you in our own sense this spring, which is usually when we usually do travel. Hopefully that will resume shortly. Hopefully you and your families are doing very well. We know this is a very difficult time for everyone in the world. And again, look to continue to be a resource to you in terms of giving you good information and hopefully knowing that you can access us whenever you need to if you do have questions. As for our three institutions, and again, many institutions like us, we do have some things in common. We are all major research institutions, meaning that we are spending hundreds of millions of dollars, likely billions of US dollars across all of our schools in research itself. And this research is not just our wonderful faculty, but it does include undergraduate students who are very much a part of our labs and very much a part of the development of knowledge at each of our institutions. While we are very much focused on research, we also happen to have pretty tremendous liberal arts education. And we think that those two go hand in hand very well, especially when thinking about undergraduates and their exploration of different kinds of education. So each of our three schools here and many schools across the US will go about the liberal arts education in different kinds of ways. That is an important piece. And that means that you are going to be in discussion-based classes and learning and engaging with faculty and really thinking about academics from a broad standpoint and not just studies that are going to be oriented around a specific job. We are all places of living and learning together. We are wonderful residential institutions, and so you will be living with your classmates and your peers over the course of 4 years on beautiful scenic campuses. You'll be engaging in different kinds of clubs and organizations, hundreds and hundreds of them that reflect the diversity of our student body across our different institutions, and diversity itself, knowing that we have students who are coming from all 50 states across the US and almost every country around the world represented between our schools. The idea of the international voice is really important to us as we try to think about how we engage people who are going to be citizens of the world. That's important to us and important to the education that you might receive. And lastly, we go about admissions and financial aid in a similar kind of way, which we will speak to towards the end of this, but hopefully again, give you some suggestions and ideas around how to think about that. But with that, I will go ahead and kick off the conversation around our individual institutions. So I'll choose at random, but perhaps we'll start with the University of Pennsylvania with Justin.
All right, thank you so much, Whitney, for that intro. I wanted to start by saying that the University of Pennsylvania is in the city of Philadelphia, if you didn't know that. You can see our beautiful campus here, both behind me. This is the what we call the first year quad. So those are places where dormitories where our students sleep. And then the images in front of you on this one and the next slide show some of our campus here. It does get cold and it does snow sometimes in the winter. We have beautiful artwork throughout our campus and wonderful old architecture here. This is the Fisher Fine Arts Library. So we have some 150-year-old buildings on our campus that still exist that look like this. But then I also wanted to show you on the next slide that we are an urban campus, meaning you can see skyscrapers in the background there. That's Center City, Philadelphia, right with some of our soccer pitches here. We are in the middle of everything in the city. And so while you have a beautiful, perhaps quintessential Ivy League campus, you also get to see and participate in everything that a large American city will bring. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how a lot of universities present themselves. And so you'll see adjectives or attributes like this that appear in a lot of places. And on the next slide, we show a little bit about the subtext. And so we're being silly here with what we're saying about these things, but I want to give you some tips to think about as you explore American universities. We often will refer to ourselves as medium-sized or large universities or small colleges or universities. What that really is not objective, because we have 10,000 undergraduate students at the University of Pennsylvania. But what that actually means at Penn may be different than another American university that also has 10,000 undergraduate students. We also have another 10,000 graduate students on the same campus as the undergraduate students. Now, the reason why that's exciting is that we have enough financial resources to ensure that our classes are small. So about 82% of our classes are under 30 students, and 95% of them are taught by faculty, not by graduate students. Now, the reason that's important is because it does affect the type of education you receive. And so it's important to ask those questions as you explore, not just look at the superficial numbers. We're a member of the Ivy League, which is 8 schools in the United States that are in the same athletic conference. The Ivy League was founded in the 1950s as an athletic conference. And one important thing we all have in common is we do not offer athletic scholarships. We only offer need-based financial aid to all applicants. Whitney mentioned the liberal arts, or arts and sciences, as it's sometimes referred to. And this is foundational knowledge that we all offer, regardless of what your major is, regardless of what school, within our universities or what degree you're receiving, you will have foundational knowledge that you will need to have a fulfilling life in whatever career you ultimately decide. And it's important that you're looking at American universities because you want to embrace that. So whether you're studying engineering or you're studying philosophy, you have to want to understand the larger context in which these things operate if you want to be successful in the 21st century. We mentioned research. Our faculty are the ones writing the textbooks. They're the ones appearing on network news like CNN as political experts around the world. They're on archaeological digs, and they bring the undergraduates along with them at our institutions. This is so important. About 75% of students at Penn participate in research by the time they graduate. And the city where we're located, Philadelphia, is an old city. It's the 5th largest area in the United States. It's one of the most affordable cities in the Northeast. It's a lot of fun. It's a fun place to be a student. Amazing food from every background you can imagine in Philadelphia. It's also a wonderful place to test knowledge, things you're learning in the classroom, to go out in the real world and actually experience them in a large city, whether it's through business internships whether it's through going to the Philadelphia Museum of Art and having a curating internship and so forth, Philadelphia is an important reason why you would come to a place like Penn. Finally, I'll just pause with our founder, Ben Franklin. So this guy did a lot of things, our founder, a lot of universities talk about them. He's significant even today, which is because in 1740, he had an idea for this college before the United States was even formed as a country, because he wanted to bring together different ideas, different schools of thought for the very first time. Because in 1740, most American colleges existed to educate men for the clergy. And so Ben Franklin had a vision for something different at that particular moment. And that's an important concept today if you're looking at Penn. All right, and so we can skip over this one, but this is a quote from Benjamin Franklin about the aim and end of all learning is service to society. And this is an important philosophy about Penn, because the application of knowledge is what we all do when we graduate from university. And this really permeates a lot of what we do on our campus. And I had mentioned, being in Philadelphia, this is an important aspect of that. This is Locust Walk, this building, this walkway you see here. It's not normally that crowded, but on certain times of the day, it does get crowded as students are coming and going to campus, coming and going to class and on different parts of our campus. The next slide, I just want to introduce, we have 4 undergraduate schools at Penn. The College of Arts and Sciences is the largest and most intellectually diverse. So everything from pre-medical studies, like all the sciences, biophysics and biology and so forth, to the humanities, like English literature, 40 different foreign languages are offered every year, gender studies, and then social sciences like economics, anthropology, sociology. Then we have 3 professional schools, the School of Nursing, the School of Engineering and Applied Science, and then the Wharton School, which is our business school. They all will study or have the opportunity to study across the universities. So even though you're getting a degree from one of these schools, you have the opportunity in that Ben Franklin idea, that sense of being able to study from a wide variety of areas to prepare yourself for service to society. And next up, I just wanted to give you a little bit of a sense of our students and the research they do. Students, whether they're studying abroad or whether they're staying in Philadelphia or perhaps they're doing an internship in Washington, D.C., they bring this sense of discovery with them at Penn. We really, really, really want to know more. And Penn students are not content just to study in the classroom and get good grades. We attract students who are truly interested in really engaging with faculty to test the limits of what we know. What we know as a human society, we want to question things, right? We want to know answers, but we also want to be part of that solution of finding the answers to questions. And our students are developed in ways that allow them to do that in all kinds of programs. I just wanted to part with a city shot. This is Philadelphia from our campus. This picture was taken from the top of one of the high-rise, tall dormitory buildings that we call a residence hall. And the advice that we like to give is another Benjamin Franklin quote. As you look at these universities, whatever you seem to be really, meaning be honest with yourself about what it is that you would bring to one of our campuses and what you're looking for. And you'll be more successful in this process. We'll talk a little bit more about that later when you're applying to selective universities, what that means. And then finally, we just want to say that if you're not already following us on social media, we want you to meet current students. We want you to not hear from admissions officers, but also to actually hear from students who are experiencing Penn and our universities and to really understand what it's like. So please do sign up and follow us.
And maybe I'll take it from there. My name is Keith Light, just like a light bulb. And it is great fun to be able to talk with you all about learning after high school. All learning through your years is very important. And one of the things that I want to pick up on Justin's themes is the idea we hope of university is not just the next step, but the time for you to use your talents and skills and aspirations and dreams and put them together with other students with a lot of energy and ideas, even audacious ideas. In fact, I'm already giving you some clues about what we care about in the admissions process. And I'm going to just mention briefly, by the way, that there are some very broad distinctions about study in American universities. And I could talk for 3 or 4 hours about this, but my colleagues would never let me go on that long with you. But here's the idea that America is relatively new to higher education and all kinds of ideas about civilization and science and so on, but we're quick learners. But one of the things we've learned is that there's great value in having scientists encounter literature and history and poetry and languages from around the world, and by the same time diplomats and economists and writers should understand quantitative reasoning and science and so on. It just makes you better prepared to study in a complicated world. And the reason I'm bringing this up is that many of your families, and it's still the case in many parts of the world, where the idea of university is to go and study one subject in depth and in preparation for a career. I can promise you that studying in American universities is not just about spending time learning poetry and a few facts about science. We do all these subjects very deeply, but the idea is to educate you broadly, even in the Benjamin Franklin spirit. I pretend that Benjamin Franklin went to Yale. And for that matter, Whitney will tell you about Columbia University, where Alexander Hamilton, a famous American, studied himself. But that's the overarching theme. It's one thing that's worth looking into, even as a practical matter. It's not whether or not one of the many great American universities has a world-class program in physics or biochemistry or data science or history. I can assure you that Columbia, Penn, and Yale don't even like to offer programs unless they're among the best in the world. But you should try to understand why it is that we want you to learn in a variety of areas, even as you go into some depth. So one other thing as we go to the next slide for Yale is that another characteristic of some of the most famous schools in America is not just that they're famous, but that in my mind, we have 3 things in common. 1, extraordinary resources. 2, we have an unfair proportion of the world's great scholars, the researchers, the professors, those who mentor each other and undergraduate students. In fact, the reason that they're drawn to universities like Harvard and Princeton and Columbia and Penn and Yale and Stanford is that we've got the great resources and the great faculty. But one reason you should think about maybe at least exploring the idea of being at one of these schools is not how many books are in the libraries or how many Nobel Prize winners are on our faculties, but with whom will you be studying? And we comb the world. We comb the universe for students who have the energy, the background in their education, the curiosity to solve problems and to make things better, even when they're tough. And again, that's a clue to the admissions process, not just to the nature of our university. So at Yale, I'll mention a few things about those resources I mentioned. This is the front of one of Yale's 24 libraries. We've got about 6 million books, you know, those things made out of paper and glue. We've also got a vast collection of resources in the digital sense. The next slide is our rare books and manuscripts museum, library actually, not just a museum, one of the largest repositories of ancient materials on the planet. We've got tiny scraps of things found in your part of the world. And we also have some of Benjamin Franklin's papers in this 6-story building that goes underground. It's cool just to go in there. The next slide is an indication that Yale is famous for a variety of things, but I want you to know that just like my colleagues' institution, we do science and technology and engineering at a very high level. I don't think this really is a time machine, but I've convinced myself that it is. The next slide shows that we have ancient resources as well. Those are real dinosaur bones in our Peabody Museum, which has about 500,000 relics, artifacts, and specimens for students to not just see, but to use in their research. Even if you're majoring in international affairs, you have access to all of these resources. So you can do a class or a project about Jurassic World and go right to the resources at Yale. The next slide is an indication that, again, something our three campuses share, and that's the idea that having a size of an undergraduate population, it matters to the quality of the learning. That's why each of our schools has relatively, shockingly small class sizes. They're the major fields, and we have many of them. Yale has more than 80. And then the individual classes that make up the menu to lead you toward a degree in one subject or even two subjects, perhaps. But we keep the class sizes small so that you can learn from each other and from the faculty. And again, at all three of our schools, our faculty, whether they're world famous or brand new young whippersnappers, are teaching undergraduates because they find it exciting and they collaborate and advise research projects. The next slide shows a particular characteristic of Yale University in particular. We're smart enough to borrow great ideas from other universities and don't tell Columbia or Penn, but we still borrow those great ideas. But this one came from the ancient European universities, the idea of having, even though Yale's relatively small compared to many world universities with only 6,000 undergraduate students, the idea of having smaller communities within the large community so that students can spend late night hours thinking up entrepreneurial ideas or working on science projects or practicing for their debate competitions on campus, or getting ready with their questions to when they have world leaders to coffees and teas right in their residential colleges with world leaders or scientists or poets or musicians. One of the most popular visitors to one of the Yale College teas, where students in one college, 100 of them could sit with the king of Bollywood and ask what it's like to create films in another part of the world. But each of Yale's 14 residential colleges is not just a place to eat and sleep and study, but it is a place to learn. In fact, advising is based there. You have senior Yale faculty members living in or near the college to give you advice on choosing major fields of study. How do you choose among the 2,000 courses? And even if you're trying to think of ways to help your home countries with things, who can you connect with at Yale or its vast connections around the world? How can you arrange an internship or program abroad to advance your learning? The next slide just shows one of the places where a lot of these conversations go on. Each of the residence halls has its own dining hall. You can eat and spend time in any of the residential colleges, but you have one place to call home for your 4 years at Yale. The next slide just shows that another characteristic of even American high schools, but certainly carries on to universities, is that play, fun, using your energy for art and journalism and activism is all part of the learning experience. It's not required, but a way to teach cultural dance and share food and share experiences and be in plays and direct plays, play sports either at the casual level as part of the intramural program, or play against Columbia and try to beat them in football or baseball, or even squash or Quidditch or whatever it might be. The next slide is just one more example of some of Yale's resources. There are 14 venues for performances alone, places for concerts and talks and ceremonies and so on. And Yale, like Columbia and Penn, like to say yes to great ideas. You see the vast and famous pipe organ in the background there. I suggest to students, and I use this as an example, if there's something you want to do, something you want to learn, something you want to research, a club you want to start, or you want to learn to play that pipe organ, you just ask. And Yale is one of the places that likes to say yes to great ideas. And the last slide is just to show that Yale is not quite as urban as Penn and Columbia. We've got a combination of being in and near a medium-sized New England, East Coast community, but we have trees and lakes. And in about 90 minutes, we can be in Whitney's city of New York, or in the other direction, Boston. I think there are a couple of universities there, and there are even students who can hop on a train at Yale and visit Justin in Philadelphia. Lots to do, see, and friends to visit at many universities on the East Coast. And now, since I've mentioned Columbia so often, maybe you'd like to hear a bit more about it. Off to you, Whitney.
Sure, I'd be happy to do what I can, but always tough to follow after you, Keith. There we go. So again, as was mentioned before, my name is Whitney Greene. I'm the Director of International Recruitment for Columbia University. I'm also a very proud alumna of the institution, doing my undergraduate in engineering and my master's in education. And so I've been there for quite a while and get to see it from a lot of different perspectives. And it's always really wonderful to get to share a bit of what that means, what this campus is like with students like you who might have an interest. So first and foremost, as was alluded to a couple of times, we are located smack dab in one of the busiest cities in the world. We are in New York, New York. We, like my colleagues here from both Penn and Yale, predate America itself. We are the first school to be founded in New York and the 5th oldest school in all of the US. And so because we are so old, or relatively old, I should say, in American terms, we were able to carve out a bit of space for us. And I think one of the biggest questions we have is what does a campus look and feel like in New York City? Is it disjointed? Is it distracted? You know, how do you have a campus life in a place like New York? And as you can see, we have a beautiful scenic campus on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. And I always like to joke, just like any other college that you imagine in the US that is beautiful and green and residential, we too have grass and trees and squirrels and birds and all of those beautiful things too. And so this 19-acre academic acropolis that our undergraduates get to call their home, about 6,000 undergraduates between our 2 undergraduate schools. But we're part of a much larger university that's over a dozen different schools, professional schools specifically. And you as an undergraduate can still take classes at these schools. So Columbia Business School, or School of International Public Affairs, or Journalism School, Mailman School of Public Health, our medical school. These are places where you can do research, where you can network, where you can still engage with some of the best and brightest by way of faculty. But this undergraduate campus is yours. And as we mentioned, all of our schools are tremendously dedicated and committed to having diverse campuses that enable you to learn so much from our world-renowned faculty, but also learn so much from your peers and classmates. And having students like you coming from the Middle East as a part of our campus is an important part of that. Columbia represents all 50 states. We have over 110 countries around the world. We're actually 4th highest in all of the United States for international population. Again, wanting to have a campus that reflects the broader diversity that is in New York City. And so we certainly have to do that. Over 100 programs of study, and all students do have guaranteed housing on our campus for all 4 years. We have 2 undergraduate schools, as I mentioned, Columbia College, which is our liberal arts school, and Columbia Engineering, which is our school for engineers and applied scientists. Columbia College houses all of our humanities, our social sciences, languages, cultural studies, theoretical sciences, really anything that you can imagine in the liberal arts space will be among those 90+ majors in Columbia College. But one of the most distinctive things I can mention, and if you remember, one important thing about Columbia is that we have this thing called the core curriculum. And as I mentioned before, all of our schools are dedicated to the liberal arts. We all go about it in a little bit of a different way. So for Columbia, we have this thing called the core curriculum. It's one of our longest running traditions. It's over 100 years old. And what it does is it exposes our students to different conversations across philosophy, different kinds of literature, music, art, different kinds of scientific studies and scientific advancements, different kinds of cultural studies, languages. There are 10 specific requirements that all Columbia students, regardless of what you choose to major, will have to take. And again, these are small base discussion classes, so about 15 to 18 students. Well, you'll be asked very open-ended questions. You'll have a faculty member who will be leading discussion, but we want you to think critically about society, how society forms, how an individual engages with society, and utilize those different academic subjects to address the question, what does it mean to be human? And you'll see this subset of books on your screen here. This is just a couple of the many, many books that you'll read over the course of your time at Columbia. But again, there's no right answer, but instead a love and appreciation for debate and dialogue, and enable you a chance to engage with that diversity from your peers in an academic setting. And so it's very important to us. It's very key to who we are. And if you have an interest in Columbia, I would strongly encourage you to get a sense of what this core curriculum is like as you try to understand what this four-year experience might look like for you. Our second school, as I mentioned, is our engineering school. We have 9 departments with 16 majors between them, a lot of them quite interdisciplinary. But just like Columbia College, we are always focused in thinking about how we are part of a greater society. And so our engineers are not just thinking about how they can be technical experts in these various fields, but how they can truly be leaders in these different spaces, and how they can leverage and utilize that technical work that they're doing to have an impact on humanity at large. And so all of our students, our alumni, our faculty are constantly charged and challenged with the idea of how can we be engineers for humanity, and think about the many interdisciplinary spaces in which we can engage, collaborate, and speak to specific technical advancements that move humanity itself forward. Among us, we keep talking about our wonderful faculty. I should note this is Brian Greene. He's a world-renowned expert in physics and mathematics. If you've read things like The Elegant Universe, you might be very familiar with his work. We also have other individuals like Farrah Griffin, who's chair of our African American and African Diaspora Department. I apologize, I think I have a plane or something going by my head. She also recently sat on a Pulitzer Prize committee to give a Pulitzer Prize to Kendrick Lamar. We have wonderful people like Gordana Vonjak-Novakovic, who is in our biomedical and engineering department. She has one of the largest laboratories in all of the United States and has tons of undergraduates in her lab working on cell and tissue engineering. And at the very bottom is Mike Massimino, who is a Columbia Engineering graduate, is a NASA astronaut, as you can tell from the picture, but is now also a faculty member in our mechanical engineering department, where he teaches a couple of classes on human space flight. So again, we all spoke to this idea of having these tremendous faculty members, but they come to our campus because they want to engage with students like you, students who are interesting and energetic and excited and want to be a part of different kinds of labs and research, and want to take advantage of the billions of dollars that we spend in creating and advancing knowledge to be in these small classroom sizes and classroom settings to share their voice and their perspective and their opinions. That's a very important piece to all of our schools and really our peers at large. And so hopefully you keep that in mind when you're thinking about why you might apply to our institutions. We have 500 clubs and organizations across our entire campus that reflects that diversity, 31 varsity level sports, as we mentioned, as a part of the Ivy League Division I conference, and tons of advising across all of our schools. We have academic advisors, career advisors, people who are going to be there to help assist you as you navigate the many resources that each of our campuses can offer. And then really importantly, Columbia is very focused on how we are part of an international community. We think of ourselves as global citizens, and our ultimate goal is really to develop future global leaders, individuals who understand what it means to utilize this kind of education to have an influence on the world around them. So we have over 150 study abroad programs that students have access to. You can create your own if you're looking to do so. This is one of our professors who's taking a group of students to Death Valley in the USA. but a lot of our professors do that around the world to do different kinds of research. We have what's called the World Leaders Forum every single year, where we invite 10 to 15 presidents and prime ministers from around the world to come talk to our community and talk about what it means to lead in their part of the world. And you get to engage with them directly and have those kinds of conversations. So time and time again, we'll find we want to bring our students to the world and the world to our students, again, with this idea of how we develop future world leaders, future global citizens. And then we can't talk about Columbia, of course, without talking about New York. Our full title is Columbia University in the city of New York, and so we do pay special attention to that. But if you have an interest in business, finance, music, art, theater, dance, journalism, international public affairs, entrepreneurship, research, we sponsor and collaborate with over 200 organizations across New York for research. Anything you can imagine, you will find some of the very best in New York City and have very easy access to that. And so we post jobs from all different companies in New York and around the world. You have access to tons and tons of museums for free, to Broadway shows, to concerts, to all different kinds of cultural experiences that you can imagine. We'll make that very easy and very free for you in many circumstances. So your Columbia ID, we call it really a passport to the world, and you get to explore New York with that. So time and time again, we find this to be a really amazing backyard for our students and ways for them to engage professionally, academically, and personally, however they choose to do so. And then we'll talk about financial aid in a few moments, but the idea is all of our schools are committed to ensuring that any student from any walk of life can come to our campus. And we'll talk about what that means, but Columbia certainly is committed to that as well. And then lastly, like my colleagues, final shot of our campus, and encouraging you to think about our social media. It really is a wonderful way to hear and see the student voice, to get more of those stories and tidbits that hopefully bring a lot of these facts and figures to life as you understand what our campuses feel like and what they can offer you over time. All of us also have a lot of virtual opportunities. And so I encourage you to go to our websites, seek out those virtual opportunities to learn more about our campuses, again, from different kinds of perspectives, from different people in our offices or different students. There's tons that we've been developing for students just like you. With that, perhaps we'll go ahead and start talking about the admissions process. Maybe Justin, you want to kick us off with that?
I'm happy to kick us off. Thank you so much, Whitney. I'm going to give you a quick overview here of applying to American universities, especially selective ones. And it may seem at first glance that we require, that we're asking a lot of different questions, and sometimes it's confusing as to why we need to know this information. But you have to understand that American universities, especially selective ones, are very holistic in our review process. So what that means is that we're looking at the whole person. We're looking at all aspects of who you are and what you would bring if we were to admit you to one of our campuses. So the reason why we ask you these various parts, things like demographics or personal information, your family information. So it can tell us things like, you're the first in your family to want to attend an American university or go to university at all, right? That's important information for us to understand in terms of the resources that you have available to you when we're reading you in the context of other applications. We ask for data about your school. We want to understand, again, that context question about what kinds of resources are available to you in your school. What have you taken advantage of? We understand this by becoming very familiar with different countries around the world and also different educational systems. And we gather this information for that reason. Standardized testing is a little bit unusual this year, but that's usually one more data point for us that we can address later. But English language proficiency is very important. So even this year, we are asking students to submit some form of English language testing, and we'll talk about that on the next slide as well. Obviously, your academic honors and awards are important, and what you say about yourself in the personal statements and the essays or the short response questions that we ask in our applications are incredibly important to us to understand your values and what is interesting to you, your personality, in determining the alignment with what we have to offer. So not all selective universities are created equal in terms of their offerings or personalities. They all have their own unique sense of what they offer, and part of the ways that we figure out who's a good fit for our campus is through the statements. So it's very important to answer the questions that you're being asked in those essays, because no matter what school you're applying to, that will be read, and they'll be paying very close attention to those details. Same thing with your activities. So what you choose to be involved in says a little bit something about your values or your personality. Don't do things, because you think we want to see them. Rather, do activities because they're interesting to you. And we know that that has changed because of the pandemic, that we're human beings that are reading these applications, and we're going through the same thing as you are as well. So we understand that, and we'll be reading through that with that context in mind. Finally, teacher evaluations, obviously your grades. These are very, very important things because teachers tell us what kind of student you are, not just that you're a good student, but that you actually are able to, let's say, maybe you're helping your classmates when they need help, right? You're generous with your knowledge. We want those kinds of attributes in our classrooms, not just smart students, because our faculty want to teach students who are going to be open-minded, who are going to ask questions, who are going to help each other. Asking questions when you have questions is a very important attribute and a sign of future success at one of our institutions. And finally, the last have to do with mid-year grades. We'll ask for grades in progress, depending on the school that you attend and the system that you're on. But either way, all of this adds up so that we understand who you are as a whole person when you're applying to one of our schools. And then I guess I'll cover this very briefly, the testing. So this year, Columbia, Penn, and Yale, and many American universities are optional for testing. So because of the pandemic, we understand that it was very hard to take standardized testing. So they are completely optional. They are not required. The SAT, the ACT, any type of the writing test. However, we encourage you, if you're a native speaker of English, or you attend a school where English is not the primary language, to submit testing either from the Toefl, the Ielts, or the Duolingo English test. Any of those are acceptable and can help bolster our understanding of your English language abilities when you apply.
Thank you so much, Justin. And to reiterate and reinforce some of the notes that Justin made by way of the application and some of those larger themes, as Justin alluded to, the American application asks for a lot, and it's quite different than a lot of different university systems ask for around the world. But the reason is, just as Justin mentioned, is that we are trying to understand you as a whole person. And what that ultimately means is in our process, we try to be holistic in our review. So yes, your grades are very important, but they are one data point. They're only one piece of who you are. And ultimately, we want you to come to our campus and not just be an excited and enthusiastic student, but also take advantage of the many resources across our campuses. That includes engaging with your peers and classmates. That includes engaging with your faculty. And what we do is we utilize the rest of that application, those essays, those recommendations. They give us a sense of who you are as a person, the different habits of mind, the qualities of character that you demonstrate, which is why there's no cookie cutter answer as to applying to a lot of American institutions. There's no formula. There's no do XYZ things and you are guaranteed into any of our schools. Instead, we try to understand that whole story from each application, the context of what's happening within your file, what you have access to, what are some of the norms that we see for different parts of the world, and that's certainly true of the Middle East. There's a different approach to extracurriculars. It's not quite the same with what you'd see in American systems, and that's okay, and we expect that when we read that. Thinking about what you might like to study, there certainly is a huge trend in a lot of students who want to study engineering, study the theoretical sciences, which is great, which is phenomenal. And you can come to our campuses and do that very, very well. But we want to also ensure that you know that we take all academic subjects very seriously, that you might come to our campuses and still want to explore, might want to try things that are a little outside of what you usually are going to engage with, and really think about your academic work or your college career as a 4-year opportunity for you to grow as a person. And so we're reading your application like that, and then in turn, we're thinking about who that person is going to be on our campus. Fit is a question that is thrown around, or a statement that's thrown around quite a bit. You might have heard this term fit. If you're looking at schools like ours, if you're looking at the Ivy League and other selected institutions, that fit just means that this is a mutual process. It means we want to admit students who are the right kind of student for our individual institution. And we want to try to understand how our institution can uniquely fit the kinds of things that you want to do and the kinds of things you want to accomplish. In order to demonstrate that fit in an application, it means that you're going to have to do some research. It means that you're going to have to do some reflection. You're going to have to, yes, come to videos and conversations like this to get a sense of who we are. You're going to have to go to our websites and do a little bit more diving and understanding of what we can offer. But then you're going to have to reflect on yourself. Who am I? Where am I going to do the best kind of learning? What are the kinds of things I might have an interest in when I go to college? And what kind of institution is going to uniquely fit that? One big piece of advice, perhaps, is you should not be applying to all 8 Ivy League schools. If you find yourself sitting down and I'm going to apply to all 8, then something has gone wrong in this process. And so you should be able to articulate why you want to apply to Yale, why you want to apply to Penn, why you want to apply to Harvard. Because when you have schools that are selected as we are, we don't just want great students, we don't just want great community members, we want students who are going to uniquely make best the resources that we can offer them. When we have that kind of selectivity, we're going to focus on students who really, really want to be with us and vice versa. And so as a tip or suggestion, when you're thinking about how I can stand out in an application process, the better you can do in articulating why a very specific school fits your very specific interest, the more likely you'll see better kinds of results. And then to quickly gloss over everything else, kind of context we spoke about with Justin, but the idea that this is a layered process. We're trying to understand your school environment. All of you are coming from different kinds of curricula, different kinds of school settings, different kinds of backgrounds. We will take that into account when we're making your decision. And so it's never, we're going to take one student over another. Instead, we're going to say, based on what the student has access to, based on the student's family, based on the student's school, how did they achieve? How did they go above and beyond? How did they make use of those resources? Within that context, we're going to make our admissions decisions. And so it's a very individualized human conversation and process. And again, why we need so many pieces of that application to make sense of all of that. As Justin noted, we want people who want to not just be in our classrooms and libraries, but also a part of our communities and really utilizing all of that application to make good sense of that. All of us are on the coalition application and the common application, so you can apply through either, whichever is best for you. And I won't go through the distinctions between different kinds of early plans. There's a little bit of differences between our schools, but for any institution, you should be asking, what is your plan? What is your early option? What do I need to abide by to work within those specific policies? And then make sure that you do abide by those things. I will note, if you do not follow those policies correctly, you can jeopardize your spot at any of our institutions. And so it's very important that you ask those questions. If you want to apply early, it's a nice way to indicate your interest in an institution, but you can be just as successful in a regular decision process as well. Those dates usually being early November and early January, but reach out about those and get more information as you need it. And lastly, I'll pass it off to Keith, who will talk a little bit about financial aid.
Thanks, Whitney. We're really grateful to our colleagues, and they are colleagues of ours at Education USA, because they help us spread the word not only about the appeal of the institutions like ours, and they're just some of the world's great universities, but also a chance to let you know why we're doing this. Our schools aren't looking for more applications, but we want a wide variety of students to apply with different temperaments, talents, convictions, experiences, and so on. And I hope we've gotten across that students from different parts of the world add to the educational value, as my colleagues have really indicated. So it's in our interest to make it possible for any students to study at our schools. And by possible, we're talking about how do you afford places that by any standards are very expensive if you pay the amount that we put on the bill. Here's the good news, is that because we want any student to be able to attend our schools, we will provide the financial support that you need to not only attend our schools, but participate in ways that any student, whatever their background may be. In other words, if your means are modest, but you'd like to attend one of our schools, you will have the same opportunities as a Penn or Columbia or Yale or Harvard or Stanford student as any other. We've got the resources, we've got the financial means to meet your need in full. And that means that the difference between the actual cost to our institutions and what's realistic for you and your family to afford, we will make up the difference with a gift of our resources. And Justin made this clear earlier on that we don't offer financial support based on your talents. It's your talents and personal qualities that we care about in choosing our diverse and talented freshman class. But as far as financial aid is concerned, at not only our schools, but all of the 8 Ivy League schools, the determination of financial aid is based on your need. And you apply, at the same time, you apply for admission to our schools. And you have an opportunity with your families or guardians to tell us what your financial situation is. Our schools are not free unless you have nothing to contribute. So, so again, we'll make up the difference between what's realistic for you to afford and what you can afford. So you should, as Whitney was saying about the application process, even though we share some philosophies and processes, you should look at the details that each school has in terms of deadlines and how to share your information. There's a reference at the top of this slide about need blind and need aware. That's admissions talk for some schools are able to make decisions without considering their overall financial aid budget, and some must pay attention to that. But it doesn't change the fact for any of our schools that if you apply, and Justin and Whitney and Keith with our colleagues decide that we'd love to have you come to our schools, that we will meet your financial need in full. And the next slide is just a chart of what I've been talking about. And I won't pause here other than to, again, leave the message that you don't apply to our schools hoping to show what a talented world football player you are, or cellist, or magician, or comedian, or star in engineering. There are some American schools where those strengths will be taken in account in terms of offering so-called merit scholarships. But at our schools, we want you to attend, and we will help you attend, but it's not based on those specific things. So if you hear about sports scholarships and such, that won't apply to our schools. But we want you to be able to attend, and that's the big message. I think it might be time for questions that you have, and I'll turn it back to our queen of guidance, and that's Whitney Greene.
Well, far from that, for sure, but I certainly invite Paula and Asil and then Melissa, who I believe we're going to work with us on the Q&A and the kinds of questions that students are asking and how we can be a resource.
Thank you, Whitney and Justin and Keith. Lots of great information. I do have some questions that were submitted prior to the session, today's session. Let me just pull those up. So first, several people were asking about specific programs such as art, engineering, and law. Where would you direct them to look for specific I can't speak, specific program offerings and requirements at your universities?
Well, I'll be happy to start, since you've enjoyed my voice. And so I'll simply say this, and it's a very good and reasonable question. And I want to emphasize again that while Columbia and Penn and some other great US schools do have some individual broad programs in business or engineering and so on, and you need to consider that. And you may use certain guides and advice at school or from Education USA, or even from our institutions about the strengths and depth and range of our individual programs in various areas. The best place to start is not the ranking lists of programs. They may be helpful at some point, but whether or not Columbia is only 8th best in the world in blank field, and Penn is only 3rd best in some field. That's not a reason not to think about these schools. But you may find extraordinary information in our websites. It sounds like a diversion, but compared to when I was applying to university in the late 1800s, these days the websites have not only information about the programs on offer, but by clicking on those links, you can learn about the faculty, you can learn about research, you can meet the students that Justin was talking about, so you don't take our word for it. You can ask questions and so on. So I really urge you to start with questions about some of these institutions. And if you know you're interested in science and technology, first of all, our schools do it extremely well, but it's reasonable to look at MIT and Stanford and Caltech. But go to the websites. That's the best answer. And you'll learn a lot more than you expected to learn, not just about programs, specific programs, but more about the university.
Thank you, Keith. Also, we have a question in general about safety. Where can people find information about safety in and around your campuses? I'm not sure if, Whitney, would you like to address that one?
Sure, unless Justin looked like you're about to say something, but if not, I'm happy.
Oh, I missed. Okay.
No, I was simply going to say that all of our universities publish these kinds of reports on our websites. And so if you dig a little bit about the health and safety of students on our campuses, we'll have reports available for families that are curious about that. I know that, the present moment aside, where there are lots of unusual events happening all over the world, generally speaking, our campuses are very, very safe places, and the United States is not our news networks, right? So in terms of what families are witnessing on news programs about, certain violence, certain episodes that happen of violence or isolated things like that, that's not really the reality, the experience of students on our various campuses. And I think it's important to understand that. And so thank you for that question, because by getting the facts, you'll have a better sense of what the reality would be like. And asking those questions of current students is also a really, really effective way to do it, because the data can also be confusing.
Okay,
I will add to that. I mean, just to quickly note, because I do know it's such an important point, both for students and for families right now with everything going on in the world. Just how very seriously our campuses take the safety of our students. You are being entrusted to us for 4 years to ensure, yes, your growth and your academic engagement, but also your well-being. And so each of our campuses has a variety of services that are offered to students at any time of day, should they need any kind of safety or concerns or whatever it might be. Part of our orientation programs will be giving students a sense of what all of those resources are. It includes public safety, which is very much a part of each of our campuses in terms of patrolling 24/7, psychological resources in case students need to chat and engage in different kinds of ways. But you'll see all different kinds of resources that are there for students. And so I would encourage you to, like Justin said, look at our websites for that, but also the programs that are in place that are meant to be a part of everyday conversation and a part of what enables students to maintain that safety.
Thank you, Whitney and Justin. I have another question. It says, what are deal breakers when deciding who deserves a spot in such elite schools? Even though admin officers look at the entire application submitted, what's the #1 indicator that proves to admission officers that the student applying deserves a spot?
That's a fun one. No, I think that's
I think
that's
it
always
was touched on, but I'll just see if you want to add anything.
Sure. No, I think, and we'll certainly ask for Keith and Justin to jump in, but there's always the question, what is the thing I do to get in? I think that's a very common question. If I had the answer, I mean, man, that would be. But you know, if we're having tens of thousands of applicants for each of our schools, and there was one thing that would get you in, and if all of the 40,000 applicants did that one thing, then we'd be right back to square one. And so that's really not how it works. But even more so, and we, I think, alluded to this on many occasions, but our campuses are incredibly diverse in every sense of the word. That includes students who come from different parts of the world, students who have different political interests and religious backgrounds and talents and academic interests and all different kinds of things that are great and that add to who our space is. And so we're not looking for someone to give us a cookie cutter answer of who they are and who they're going to be in our campus. We want them to be themselves. And that sounds very, very cliche, but the ideal situation is that a student demonstrates exactly who we are. We say, yes, we understand how that will fit into our larger class, our larger academic ecosystem. And you're going to be a part of what makes this campus great for others. And you're going to help them ask different kinds of questions and think about the world in different kinds of ways. As far as deal breakers or things that are tough, I would say your academic, transcript is certainly important. We are not looking for perfect students. You don't have to have, a 45 out of 45. You don't have to have all A's across your national curriculum. You don't have to have straight 100s. But ultimately, we want to see that you're a student who takes their work seriously. Has done that over a course of many years. We do know when you get into secondary school, sometimes it takes a little bit of time to ramp up, but ultimately we are first and foremost academically rigorous institutions, and that's an important piece of who we are on top of everything else. But no, unfortunately, there is no one thing that a student could ever do to get into any of our campuses because that whole story is truly important.
And let me say too, that's one thing not to ask students and alumni because they think there might be one thing, or the guidebooks think that you need to do this with your essays and that with your teacher recommendations and send us 100 certificates since you were age 10. That's all guessing. Whitney covered it very well, and in fact, what you should think, especially in terms of our schools, is that I am not going to underestimate that the qualities and talents that I have and the way I have to express it isn't just the thing that Columbia and Penn and Yale and Princeton might like to include. The problem with thinking that there's one route to doing it is that a bunch of people start looking exactly the same. And so try very hard to avoid that, and do trust us because we do it every day. It's the variety of backgrounds, as Whitney said, that makes university so exciting for us. Not a same few secret surefire qualities.
Thank you, Keith.
And I would just add one quick thing to that. I mean, I'm not on the admission side, but one of the things we do talk to students about when we're talking about the holistic process is that, yes, individual applicants are being looked at, but then in terms of the final admitted pool, you're looking at a class as a whole, because you do want to make sure that that diversity is represented in all of the different aspects that Whitney has mentioned. So, you can look at all the eligible applicants, then decide who you would admit, and then look at who is going to get admitted that would make up that one class that really has all of those different aspects included.
Well said, Melissa.
Thank you, Melissa. So I have a question about financial aid. Participants asking, does applying for financial aid put an applicant at a disadvantage in comparison to one who's willing to pay the full price?
I'm happy to jump in here. So at Penn, we were one of the schools that are listed as need aware if you were not a permanent resident or a citizen in the United States. And so what that means is that if you are admitted, you get the exact same financial aid package as someone would domestically in terms of the need-based financial scholarship. The question is around whether or not you're at a selective disadvantage if you're applying for financial aid, or it sounds like if you're an advantage if you don't need financial aid. At highly selective universities like ours, that doesn't matter. And so if you're applying for financial aid, you are in a more competitive pool in the sense that at a place like Penn, you're competing for financial aid, you know, there's a certain number of dollars and so forth, but it's such a selective process that there's no acceptance rate difference, right? The acceptance rate is almost identical between applicants who are applying for financial aid, at least at Penn, and those who are not.
And I'll quickly add to that, being one of the need-aware schools too. And again, just to note it perfectly, we are fortunate that we are schools that do have tremendous resources, and we want to actively use those resources to assist students and families with different walks of life to come to our campus. In our circumstances, we want to be transparent. We want you to know everything that is going into that admissions decision, which means your financial aid in that case is one data point among still your entire holistic admissions review. But just to note it, by the time we get to the point that we are looking to admit you, then we are looking to fund you as well. That's the question that comes along with it. That's a good question to ask to different kinds of institutions, because that can play a very important part in how you're being admitted, or what is going to be considered, or what might really influence your ultimate outcome. And so I would encourage you to ask that question consistently of different kinds of schools, that you get solid information.
Thank you, Whitney. We have a participant asking about the GRE. We've touched on the SAT and ACT, that those requirements are optional, test optional this year. What about for the GRE?
So we are undergraduate focused. So as a result, we're not able to comment about any of the graduate level exams in terms of the programs that may or may not be requiring them. Okay.
Thank you. I'm guessing maybe they could check on the website, that it may look at the graduate studies programs on the specific websites. They may find the information there.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's see. My daughter is a U.S. citizen, currently in Indian curriculum school. So I had another question. When students are coming from non-American high schools, non-American curriculum high schools, does that impact their ability to be accepted into the university? Somebody's asking about A levels and Indian curriculum. How is that weighed?
Our interest is to find smart, curious, talented students. And we look at those bits of evidence wherever you're coming from, school-wise, curriculum-wise, and so on. And we don't try to translate the Indian curriculum or the Western Africa curriculum into our grade point average system in the way we look at it. In fact, the whole idea of holistic admissions is trying to understand you, as Whitney said, where you sit, what the context is. That's why it's not just Whitney and Justin and Keith looking at applications. We have teams in our admissions offices who are dedicated to understanding the different curricula around the world and how to understand those different systems, not just the grading system, but what's the culture of the school, where extracurriculars aren't focused as much, or grading is very tough. The short answer is that you're not at any kind of disadvantage if you're at a non-American style school, I promise. Nod your head, Whitney and Justin, if you agree. Good.
I would just quickly add, as Keith mentioned, we have regional officers to get to know that, but also things like the Middle East, for example, it's very common that you might be bouncing between different kinds of curricula, or have different kinds of curricula in one school, or maybe you started in one place or in something else. Or someone mentioned being in an Indian curriculum, but going to school in the Middle East. We've seen every combination of those different things that you can imagine, and part of our role is to understand what all of that means and how we can still review and assess an application out of fairness to that student and their individualized context.
Thank you. Participants asking, if my writing sample exceeds the required number of pages, is that okay?
Well, if what the participant is talking about is the essays that are part of the application itself, the common application essay or the supplementary essays that are part of it, we recommend that you take the guidance we offer. There are other ways to send additional information, but part of the whole idea is that we're asking for the amount of in terms of magnitude of the reflection that we want you to expend. It's not rigid. It's just that it's, I think it's very smart to follow the guidance. If the question has to do with supplemental information, and sometimes students will send us recording of their piano playing or vocal singing, or an abstract of their research, and even some writing samples and so on, then again, you should follow the instructions that each school offers about whether or not sending a sample of your exciting or moving poetry or whatever it might be. So follow the instructions and err on the side of not exceeding what's expected. It's not an assembly line process, but I think we appreciate it when students understand what we're asking. Does that make sense? I hope it does. And do not, even though you have opportunities to send some additional information or make additional points, we want to know if there are things we should know that aren't covered in the questions in the application. But don't use that as a license to send a 20-page resume of all of your work, not because we won't look at what comes in, but there's a point where there's so much information that we lose the theme.
Thank you, Keith.
And let me ask one related question to the international curriculum type question, because we do get students who are coming from schools with English language as the medium of instruction, and they're typically not sure of, are the proficiency tests for Toefl, Ielts, or Duolingo a requirement, or how would they kind of get around or navigate that requirement if they've already been studying in English?
Sure. I can jump in there. Typically for our school, certainly the three of us here, I think I can speak for our peer group, knowing some of the things that they do. But one, it's a good question to again ask all schools, because there might be different requirements. For us specifically, really the idea is not so much to have an additional requirement, but instead, as we noted, we are very rigorous academic institutions. And we want to ensure that students are going to be not only comfortable, but are going to be able to thrive in classrooms where they're going to have to listen to rapidly spoken idiomatic English, where they're going to need to respond in those kinds of environments, where they're going to need to write many papers in a given week or across an entire semester, and that they're going to have the tools that they need to kind of hit the ground running with respect to their English. So in most instances, if a student is in an English-speaking environment for their entire secondary school career, then no, we do not need an English language proficiency test. They essentially have shown us they can do that by graduating from high school and that being in English the entire time. If a student has something less than that, and I should note, there's sometimes schools that have other ways of addressing that. Sometimes your SAT reading can be a part of that. Sometimes your ACT reading. If English is still your first language and you're able to share that with us and tell us that in your application, there are many ways that we try to address that before you actually need to take an English exam. But ultimately, we just want some indicator that you're going to jump into those spaces very quickly and be okay. And that's where we'll ask for those English language proficiency exams. But I would encourage students to look at the policies for each school to make sure that they're good to go there.
Thank you. Thanks, Melissa, for that clarifying point as well, the question. So we have a question about the impact of COVID-19 on scholarships, aid, admissions, acceptance rate. I guess they're just looking for some general information. Anybody want to take that one?
So I think generally speaking, nothing has changed in terms of the ways that we're looking for the types of students that we've been looking for all along. And in terms of acceptance rates and that type of a thing, generally speaking for this year, it's really only impacted, I think, students who've decided to postpone their enrollment by 1 year that have been admitted to our universities. That has presented some opportunities for students to be admitted from wait lists for this year. For next year, when we approach the application process, I mentioned all of the themes today are about holistic, whole person review and real people who understand the region, who understand the schools that you're attending, reading the applications and using common sense. And so we're going to understand why certain activities may have paused or taken a different form or stopped altogether, for example, because of the pandemic. And we're going to understand why certain grades maybe have switched from graded to pass or fail grades and so forth. And so just understand that, that human context is very important to our process as we're reading this. And so not to worry about that too much because everyone's going through the same thing. And so that's how we're going to approach the process next year. But nothing has changed in terms of our targets of the types of students that we'd like to admit and who we're going to enroll.
Okay, thank you for that. So, sorry, I'm just trying to, getting good at, will getting a good SAT subject test score boost your chances of being accepted and getting a full scholarship?
No, so I can quickly answer that. As Keith mentioned, for our 3 schools, for the entire Ivy League, the only financial aid we will ever give is based on what your family needs for you to attend our institution. So there's nothing related to the admissions process aside from being admitted that's going to dictate the amount of funding or kind of funding that you get. So we do not offer academic scholarships, merit-based scholarships, athletic scholarships. Everything is based on what your family needs for you to attend. When you do apply, there are a variety of things that you might submit to any financial aid office, including a CSS profile in some cases. Some schools might have their individual financial aid application. Again, you can see how they want you to provide that information. And based on the details that are provided, we will work with understanding what your family can comfortably contribute to any of our schools. Whatever is left over in that full cost of attendance, we will match with a grant. And so that is how we give financial aid. And so it is a bit different. It's a good question to ask each institution that you're engaging with to understand how to get those scholarships. But in our case, and again, the entire Ivy League, it really is only based on what a family needs for you to attend our school. And note that need can be different than want. And so we certainly recognize and understand that, but in order to spread our resources around to invite different students to our campus, it is only based on demonstrated need.
One other thing, by the way, about testing, this is going to be an unusual year in terms of our expectations, but in general, we hope you'll understand that the SAT or the ACT are not the American equivalents to A-levels, other national exams, international baccalaureate. In fact, they don't replace what you're learning in school and what your marks there indicate. That the testing helps us with a little bit additional information. Our schools do not rely on the tests that some European universities, for instance, might use, where your A-level results or other results are the primary determination of your university admission. You mentioned the Indian curriculum. In India, it's very much exam-based. For us, the SATs and other such things are helpful to us, and as Whitney explained, that its relationship or not relationship to financial aid. But you also asked about whether great scores will help your application. Well, it's better to have good scores if you're submitting scores, but they are not the same thing as those national exams.
And I can note one thing very quickly, just on the topic of testing, because we all are test optional in the coming year. A common question we've gotten is, will submitting testing give you an advantage in this process? The reason being, or the reason why we are test optional, is is knowing that there are a lot of challenges in students' ability to actually access the test and be able to take it to the best of their ability, like any other given year. And so the idea is not to advantage students who can go out of their way to take their test or find some way to take it or spend absorbent amount of money and time to go find some way to take the test. We are test optional, as we recognize that this year that is going to be very, very difficult for most students. And so it's not going to give you an advantage if you're not able to take, or if you are able to take it, but you're not at a disadvantage too if you're not able to take it. That's not how it really will work.
Thank you. We have one final question. There are two and they're very similar, but basically as they do taking a few extracurricular activities, but stick with them for a long period of time, or is it better to do a whole bunch of activities over a short period of time? Which is more beneficial to being accepted?
I'm happy to address this one. So we have students who engage in activities because they're interested in them, and maybe they have talents across a broad range of things. So I can be a musician and I can be an actor, and I can also want to do physics research. Those types of students are very common on our campuses. At the same time, we don't expect every applicant to share those kinds of that breadth of interest, right? You might be a very good violin player, and that might be like how you spend all of your time when you're not being a student and not being a son or daughter or a brother and sister and so forth. And that's okay too. So we're not asking you, it's not about the size of your resume or the number of activities that you're doing. It's about how meaningful are those activities to you. And that's going to mean different things to different people. And we admit all kinds of students. So some students who, their main thing is just music or their main thing is just athletics. But there are obviously students who do a wide variety of things as well. It's totally up to you. And we only care if it's important to you. And if it's important to you, that will come through in the essays and in the recommendations and in your application. And that's what's important.
Okay, thank you, Justin. And I see that there were a few questions about financial aid, and Keith addressed those in the chat itself. So I think we'll wrap it up. Wait, one more question. Let's see. Yep, no, I think that's all the questions for today. Melissa, do you have anything to add? Melissa?
Hi, yes, my meeting was
okay, sorry.
for a moment. No, I just want to say thank you so much to Justin, Keith, and Whitney. This was excellent information. Our students are always asking these types of questions, and it's great for them to hear that from you. I want to thank all the participants who signed on. This is what gives us the insights into what information you're looking for so that we can continue to offer information and workshops with our HEI colleagues. And so we just want to say thank you to everyone for that. Again, it will be available on the Facebook, Qatar Facebook page. So if you have friends that were not able to join today that are interested and would love to have this information, please direct them there. And also look for additional sessions that are coming up.
Thank you, Melissa.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Justin, Whitney, and Keith. And we just have our final slide that has our contact information. There we go. So if anybody has any additional questions, please feel free to reach out to us at doha@educationusa.org. We have a lot of questions about financial aid, and look for future sessions that have to do specifically with financial aid and scholarship opportunities for international students. We post a lot of information on our Facebook page, so follow us there. And thank you for joining us.
Thank you all.
Add just how much we appreciate having a chance to engage with you. We do our best work internationally with Education USA, and so we can't praise you and thank you enough for these spaces that you provide for universities like ours, and really appreciate your continued partnership with us, and look forward to much, much more.
Thank you so much.
Thank
you all.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, bye.